Welcome back to the Daily Rambam class. Today we cover a very interesting section of laws relating to appropriate and inappropriate conduct between man and woman, the ideal marriage, and many other significant laws which most people encounter on a regular basis. But before we get to today's chapter, which is chapter 21, let's start by taking a look at where we're up to in the Rambam, as we usually do on a Thursday. Reminder that we're in the 5th volume of the Rambam, Sefer Kedusha, the book on holiness, and in it there are 3 subjects: forbidden relations, forbidden foods, and the laws of Shechita. Within forbidden relations, there are 22 chapters. We've covered various laws, so it's not only about just forbidden relations, but we've discussed converts and a Kohen and who a Kohen can and can't marry. And today we're going to discuss, it's not so much about just people forbidden relationships, but it's more about, in general, the appropriate conduct between men and women, which the Rambam includes in the section, since it does relate to relations, refers specifically to sexual relations. But the Rambam is going to speak today how this law or this prohibition or this subject is not limited only to actual sexual relations, but also to any negative conduct between men and women. And so let's take a look at today's chapter. It's a long chapter. There are 32 halachas, but we will do as best as we can. So the first 8 halachas speak pretty much about inappropriate conduct. So the Rambam starts with the famous halacha, which is that the Torah's prohibition of interaction between men and women is not limited to sexual relations, but it includes any form of closeness, physical closeness of that nature, even if it doesn't actually include intercourse. And the Rambam says, whoever shares physical intimacy with one of the arayas are, as we've learned, people that the Torah prohibits us from marrying with a punishment of kares, which is quite a severe punishment, even though he didn't actually become involved in sexual relations, or if a person, men and women, embrace or kiss, but out of desire. So that's quite relevant to me here, that it's out of desire, and derive pleasure from the physical conduct. Such a person should receive lashes. Obviously, this would be like any other negative commandment where warnings would need to be issued, and it would need to be done in a legislative way. It's not up to anybody to go and respond in such a way. But the Rambam says that included in the biblical, the scriptural prohibition of refraining from performing any of the abominable practices, included in that is also not only teaches that not only is intercourse forbidden between outside of marriage, but any form of physical contact between men and women which are done out of desire, if it's done between a man and woman that are biblically forbidden from each other, which parenthetically would include any woman if she is in a state of niddah, which would be the case provided she hasn't gone to mikveh since her last period. So that's also scripturally forbidden. Now, other commentaries, by the way, learn that it's rabbinic. Everybody agrees it's forbidden. So some say, everybody says it's not allowed, but some say that this is rabbinic and it's a fence to prevent a person, because once a couple will be allowed to engage in such behavior, then it could become almost impossible for them to avoid intercourse. But the Rambam says that no, the prohibition of such is not only rabbinic as preventative, but it actually is a scriptural prohibition in its own right. As far as handshakes, so if you're meeting with a woman for a business meeting and you have a handshake, so some authorities say that this clearly doesn't have any desire dimension to it. It's not done out of desire, and therefore this would not be forbidden, because the Rambam says any contact that is done out of desire. So some say that a handshake in business is not done out of desire, and therefore that is allowed. Other commentaries, such as Rav Moshe Feinstein, say that no, even a handshake, the nature of men and women is that there is unfortunately a fair likelihood that even in a business transaction, the man may have inappropriate thoughts as a result of that, and that should be avoided. But practically, I guess you could check in with your local Orthodox rabbi. That's just a practical example in everyday business of this halacha. But obviously, another practical example would be, in general, or relevant idea would be the idea of contact in the nature of attraction between men and women. It should be reserved only for marriage. Also, the Torah says, do not draw close to reveal nakedness. Implied is that we are forbidden to draw close to acts that lead to revealing nakedness. That's quite self-explanatory. So that was as far as actual physical contact between men and women. Not just any physical contact. A doctor, on the other hand, would be quite different, because that's clearly not out of desire and maybe out of necessity. Obviously, it's not a license. You know, if a man is a doctor and he sees that when he does have physical contact with women, it causes him to have certain thoughts, then it would mean that he would have to be limited on which patients he takes. But hopefully that wouldn't be the case. So that would be an example of where such a thing would be allowed in a medical context, for sure. And other contexts as well, you know, somebody's fallen and you help them up. That's quite different. Okay, now, even if there isn't physical contact, that could also be problematic. A person who engages in any of the above-mentioned practices is considered likely to engage in forbidden sexual relations. And once we talk about things that may lead to sexual relations, the previous and halacha aleph are biblically forbidden according to the Rambam. The following are forbidden by the rabbis, but for the same reason, because of where they may lead. It is forbidden for a person to make motions with his hands or feet, or wink with his eyes to one of the arayas, meaning to a woman that he is forbidden to marry, to share mirth with her, or to act frivolously with her. Never heard that word share mirth with being used in a conversation. Let's just look at the Hebrew again. I think it means to be silly. To like make certain types of jokes, or to act frivolously with her. It is even forbidden to smell her perfume or to gaze at her beauty. A person who performs any of these actions intentionally should be given stripes for rebellious conduct. So this is now rabbinic. Stripes of rebellious conduct is something that the rabbis would do, obviously only in temple time, something that certainly cannot be done today. But the idea is that any action, even if there isn't physical contact, which is an activity which will lead a person to engage in sexual conduct, is also forbidden. A person who looks at even a small finger of a woman with the intent of deriving pleasure is considered as if he looked at her private spot, which basically is saying that even if it's, you know, it's her finger, it's just part of the person, but the way the person looks is in a way that is an inappropriate way, then that is already, it's bad. It's no good. It's going to lead the person in the wrong direction. It is even forbidden to hear the voice of a woman, forbidden as an erva, or to look at her hair. Certainly there are certain leniencies have been granted, but both these contexts, when I say have been, not necessarily, but they are, depending on maybe the community or your rabbi. But I would still say that the general approach is that both a woman's voice in song and a woman's hair both have more of an intimate nature. Some argue that today, you know, where it's become so normal, so it lost its intimate association. Both of those things, a woman singing and a woman's hair. But I mean, this is probably, there's a lot of discussion about that, but still halacha suggests that both of these things do have more of an intimate nature, a woman's hair and her voice in song, and therefore that is the reason why married women cover their hair and don't sing.
Hello?
Is there a question? We have a lot to get through, so maybe we need to hold the questions and we could try to get back to that. Okay. These matters are also forbidden with regard to women with whom relations are forbidden on the basis of merely a negative commandment. So there are some women that the Torah says one is forbidden to marry, and if he does marry such a woman, the punishment is kares, or if he does engage in intimacy with such a woman, which would be, for example, a married woman or a sibling or a woman in a state of niddah that hasn't been to mikveh. But there are other women in the Torah also forbids one from marrying, but doesn't give as serious a punishment. And he says, however, if they're forbidden, they're forbidden. There's no difference. It is permitted to look at the face of an unmarried woman and examine her features, whether she is a virgin or has already engaged in relations. I'm not sure why it mentions that proviso previously, to whether she is attracted to whether she is attractive in his eyes so that he may marry her. I'm not sure. Basically, a man is allowed to observe a woman's beauty if he's looking to marry her. Not only is he allowed to, but there's no prohibition in doing this. On the contrary, it is proper to do this. Certainly, a man should not marry a woman if he is not physically attracted to her beauty. One should not, however, look in a licentious manner, in an inappropriate way. Behold, Job 31 says, I established a covenant with my eyes, I would not gaze at a maiden. This obviously is talking about in an inappropriate way. So what this means in very practical terms, for example, the Chabad circles, is when you do go out with on a shidduch and you go to meet a girl, certainly she does try to dress her best, and if you're not attracted to her, then it means that she's not your bashet. But that said, even in the context of a boy and girl that are going out on a date or going out on a shidduch for the purpose of marriage, so it should still be, he needs to make sure that he looks in an appropriate way and not in an inappropriate way, that he keeps things in an appropriate context, in which case it not only is allowed, but is most appropriate. Okay. Now here's an interesting one, number 4. A woman at a time of niddah, when she needs to go to mikveh, at that point she is as prohibited from her husband as any other woman. And so one might think that a man is not allowed to look at his very own wife while she is in that state before she goes to mikveh, because it may lead him to have a forbidden relationship. No, says the Rambam. No, says the Torah. It is permitted for a person to gaze at his wife, even when she's in a state of niddah, although she is an eva at that time. Although his heart derives satisfaction from seeing her, since she will be permitted to him afterwards, he will not suffer a lapse. So there's an idea of the Yetzer Hara. This is a general idea that, when a person has a desire to do something wrong, you won't always be able to tell your Yetzer Hara to get lost, but you might be able to tell your Yetzer Hara, not now, in another few minutes, and you kind of just push him off, and that way, that's the way that you don't fall. So certainly in the case of a married couple, if at the moment his wife is forbidden to him, the knowledge that in the future she will be permitted to him is enough of it gives strength to the person to withstand the temptations of his evil inclination and to wait until such an act is not a sin, but on the contrary is a mitzvah. He should not, however, share mirth with her or act frivolously with her, lest this lead to sin. So even a husband and wife, if at the moment the woman is in a state where they are not allowed to be intimate, then there still should be some degree of caution that's exercised to prevent the conversation from going in certain directions which could lead them to sin. So in other words, generally in regular conversation and in regular sight, we trust that a person can push off his Yetzer Hara by telling his evil inclination that just wait a little bit and then the sin will be turned into a mitzvah. But that's not a guarantee. That doesn't mean that a person can suddenly enter into the type of conversation that leads to intimacy, because then he might not, chas v'shalom, be able to withstand the temptation. Okay, here's another interesting one. It is forbidden for a man to have any woman, whether a young girl or an adult, a servant or a freed woman, perform personal tasks for him to serve him, lest he come to lewd thoughts. Which tasks are referred to? Washing his face, his hands, his feet. So I guess that could be relevant if it's some kind of man's spa, spreading his bed in his presence, pouring him a cup. I mean, that could be interesting. If you're in a restaurant and the waiter wants to pour you, I don't know, a cup of wine, probably better to avoid that, because somehow the act of pouring an honorable cup, a woman pouring an honorable cup for a man, can lead him to inappropriate thoughts. This should only be done for a man by his wife, not by any other woman. A man should not send greetings to a woman at all, even by a messenger. Commentaries say, the Bhagavad Mishnah says that it's worth making a distinction between asking about a woman's welfare, is she okay, rather than like sending personal greetings. I think today very often when a person asks send regards to your wife, or how's your wife doing, it's more out of the Bhagavad Mishnah saying if you're asking how the man's wife is doing, then it's just caring about their welfare. It's not in the nature of trying to send a special wish. Or even if you say regards, it may just be a out of respect. Some say that today, as opposed to, if a person wants to send, please send her my very best, or there can be a line at a certain point that's crossed, which is that, this is not your wife, and therefore certain boundaries should be put in place. Okay, here's another interesting one. Hugging relatives, super relevant. When a man embraces or kisses any of the women forbidden to him as a rayas, despite the fact that his heart does not disturb him concerning the matter, like his adult sister,
Can't hear you, Rabbi.
No sound, nothing.
Zoom glitch.
Rabbi, disappeared.
Rabbi, we've lost your voice.
It's the radar. You're on mute, Rabbi.
Rabbi, you've muted yourself.
I'm sorry, my computer must have lost connection. Did you lose me a while back or just now?
A while back, Rabbi.
Which halacha?
From the beginning of number 6.
Okay, thank you. So here's quite a relevant one. If a man embraces or kisses a woman forbidden to him as a rayas, even though this won't cause him to have any inappropriate thoughts, for example, his adult sister or his aunt, his mother's sister or the like, it is shameful. So the Rambam doesn't say it's not allowed. A guy is allowed to hug his sister even though they're adults, but he does say it's shameful. I guess the Torah is saying that the act of adult men and women embracing should really be reserved specifically to husband and wife. But again, it's not forbidden, it's discouraged. Now that said, if that's, if your sister's just gotten off a plane and you haven't seen her in 6 months, then, and you're not going to hug her, then you should make sure to compensate for it in other ways. You certainly don't want to give the impression that you don't love her and you don't care for her. But the Rambam nonetheless is discouraging hugging between a man and woman other than a husband and wife, and a parent and child, as we'll see in a moment. It is forbidden and it is foolish conduct. The Rambam actually says it is forbidden. But there's no punishment, he says, elsewhere. Interesting. This applies even if he has no desire or pleasure at all, for one should not show closeness to a woman forbidden as an erva at all, whether an adult or a minor, except a woman to her son and a father to his daughter. So between parent and child, there is no concern whatsoever, no problem whatsoever of an embrace. And I guess there could even be a mitzvah of showing respect to one's parents. I see one of the commentaries of the Shulchan Aruch say that this would also apply between to a father to his granddaughter, or a brother to his little sister. Little sister as in infant sister. Okay, what is implied? A father is permitted to embrace his daughter, kiss her, and sleep with her with their bodies touching. We'll see in a moment. This is when they're still very young. This is probably in a case, obviously, it means if they're under circumstances that there isn't space for them to have their own space. People may be living in a state of poverty. Back in the day, it seemed like it was more common for people to sleep undressed as opposed to wearing pajamas. So certainly nowadays, even if the Torah doesn't forbid it, I would think that there's something alarming about such behavior. And a mother may do the same with her son as long as they are young. When they grow and become mature, with the girl's body becoming developed, then they should each sleep in clothing. If the daughter is embarrassed to stand before her father undressed, or if the daughter is married, even though she's very young, and similarly, if the mother was embarrassed to stand before her son undressed, even if the children are young, then they should not be sharing a bed without clothes. But obviously with clothes, nothing wrong with, a kid has a nightmare or needs a bit of comfort, he would be allowed to join his mother or father in their bed. Lesbian relations are forbidden. This is the conduct of Egypt, which we were warned against. As the Torah says, do not follow the conduct of Egypt. Our sages said, what would they do? A man would marry a man, a woman would marry a woman, and a woman would marry two men. Although this conduct is forbidden, punishment, lashes, is not administered by the courts in temple times because there isn't a specific act between women. And there's no intercourse at all. Therefore, such women are not forbidden to marry into the priesthood or as Zionist, nor does a woman become prohibited to her husband. Meaning, if a woman has a relationship or is intimate with another woman, this doesn't change her status in any way. It would not forbid her to her husband. For this is not considered harlotry. It is, however, appropriate to give them stripes for rebellion, meaning some kind of punishment should be administered, because they performed the transgression. A man should take precautions with his wife with regards to this matter, and should prevent women who are known to engage in such practices from visiting her and from visiting them. So the Torah does forbid such relationships. It's worth mentioning that the Torah's prohibition is on the act, but not on the feeling. Sometimes a person may have a feeling, and that's a feeling that they have. But whether they can act on that feeling is something that the Torah does address. And just as if a person has a feeling that they just, whatever the term is, they like to steal, we're not going to say that you're illegitimate for wanting to steal. You're a human being and you should be respected. And maybe there are certain courses or things that you could do to help you. But for the person to actually go and steal, that's something that would be forbidden. And so even in 2021, the Torah doesn't change, and such conduct remains forbidden. Moving on to the next subject, and I see we're already at 126 and we still have so much to learn. Here's a whole lot of laws regarding how a husband and wife should conduct themselves. Now, it's very important, as you'll see in a moment, and I think this is something that's often worth mentioning, and that is that it's important to differentiate between that which is forbidden and that which is not advised, that which is discouraged. In all areas, both in financial matters and in interpersonal matters. And so here too, we're going to see that as far as what's allowed, that's one thing. But as far as what's encouraged, that's a whole other story. So it's important not to cause the line between the two to become dropped. It's important for if a person thinks that something is very inappropriate and he says it's not allowed when really it is allowed, then you can have the story like Adam and Chava. The person will feel, well, they've already done this sin, so now they can do every other sin in the book. But if a person says, no, this is allowed, but I discourage it, then if a person does such a thing, even though he knows it's discouraged, at least he'll know he's not going to think of himself, or he won't be sinning. And so, in other words, it's important to draw the line between what's a red zone and what's a orange zone. Some things are completely not allowed and must be avoided at all costs, and other things are discouraged. And this certainly applies to the next few halachas that we are about to learn. A man's wife is permitted to him, therefore a man may do whatever he desires with his wife. He may engage in relations whenever he desires, kiss any organ he desires. Other commentaries argue with this and say a man is not allowed to kiss a woman's private spot. That's one exception. Engage in vaginal or anal intercourse, or engage in physical intimacy without relations, provided he does not release seed in vain. That one of the 613 mitzvahs is that a man is not allowed to release seeds. So that would be something he would need to avoid. Nevertheless, it is pious conduct for a person not to act frivolously concerning such matters, and to sanctify himself at the time of relations, as explained previously in Hilchos Teis. He should not depart from the ordinary pattern of the world, for this act was given to us solely for the sake of procreation. You can imagine that a lot of attention has been drawn to these words of the Rambam. The Rambam is not saying that intimacy is not an area where a relationship should be developed between husband and wife. On the contrary, as we've learned elsewhere, a man is obligated to be intimate with his wife. It's one of the three obligations of a man to his wife that are written in the Ksuva. But what the Rambam is saying is that intercourse ultimately should be directed towards a holy cause. It should be directed towards holiness, and certainly towards bringing children is a holy cause, or in the context of developing a relationship. But if it's just a matter of a person being very just kind of being filled with lust and chasing his desires, that's allowed, but it certainly is discouraged. A man is forbidden to engage in relations by candlelight. I know in secular society, these are all things that when a person becomes more religious, a person needs to do things step by step, because, once a person lives a certain lifestyle, certain things are not easy to change, but it's important to know what the Torah does say about these things. In general, intimacy should be experienced more by feeling than by sight. If on the Shabbos he did not have another room and there is a light burning, he should not engage in relations at all. That's how serious it is, that it should be done in the dark. Similarly, it is forbidden for a Jew to engage in relations during the day, because this causes brazenness. Again, we want intimacy to be kept holy, and it's more holy when it's experienced by feeling more than by sight. Sight can cause a person to be more inappropriate. If he is a Torah scholar who will not be drawn after this, meaning is a person that generally is already working on his nature, not to be drawn after brazen behavior, then he would be allowed to trust himself to create darkness with his garments, meaning under a blanket. But otherwise, this should be avoided and only be done in a time of great need. The best time for intercourse is in middle of the night. One of the commentaries explain that at that point, all of the other worries of life have hopefully subsided, and the digestive system might be in a good space, not too full and not too hungry. This certainly is not, there's no requirement on this. It's just saying a time that is probably going to be most beneficial. But the idea is that it should be done in the dark and without any disturbances. Frequency. I see it's already 1:30. Obviously, if you need to go, then please do. But because of the significance and importance of these halachas, I will take the liberty to continue for another few minutes. Halacha 11, frequency. Our sages do not deny satisfaction from a person who engages in sexual relations excessively and frequents his life like a rooster. This reflects a very blemished character. It is the way underdeveloped people conduct themselves. Instead, everyone who minimizes his sexual conduct is praiseworthy. I better stop as I say these words and clarify. In the 21st century, unfortunately, in most marriages, sexual conduct is happening too infrequently. A man has an obligation to his wife. And so this is talking about a person who is being excessive. But if a person isn't meeting his obligations to his wife, which the Torah says it depends on the nature of his profession, how exhausted he is, but really it should be at least once a week, if not 2 or 3 times a week, then certainly he should not be minimizing, he should be maximizing. But minimizing means that he shouldn't just be excessive about it. Provided he does not neglect his conjugal duties, which was the next words of the Rambam. But I couldn't skip a breath without clarifying that more, how in today's society, unfortunately, intercourse is very often very much neglected and should be happening more often than it does. Provided he doesn't neglect his conjugal duties without his wife's consent. So a man has an obligation to be intimate with his wife unless she says that she's okay with him avoiding it. So for example, if a man wants to go away on business and will be away for an extended period of time, he would need to get consent of his wife, because it means that he will be missing his responsibilities to his wife, and therefore he would need his wife's permission. The sole reason why originally it was ordained that a person who had a seminal mission should not read from the Torah unless they go to mikveh. Originally, a person wasn't allowed to get called up to the Torah unless they went to mikveh. And that original institution was to avoid excessive sexual conduct or to minimize it. Nowadays, this is no longer the halacha. Although Hasidim still do try to go to mikveh every day, regardless of whether or not they were involved in intimacy. Halacha 12, in good spirit. Similarly, our sages forbade a person from engaging in relations with his wife while his heart is focused on another woman. That's a no-no. He should not engage in relations while drunk, nor while in an argument, nor out of hatred. If a person wants to be intimate with his wife, he needs to realize that he first needs to get everything in line, that the spirit be good. Otherwise, he will have to hold back on any of his desires. He should not engage in relations with her against her will, when she is afraid of him, nor when one of them is placed under a ban of ostracism. He should not engage in relations with his wife after he made the decision to divorce her. If he does so, the children will not be of proper character. There will be those who are brazen and others who are rebellious and sinful, since they were born out of a union which was, although not forbidden, but very much ugly, if I could call it that. Very much, not a good situation. Number 13, similarly, our sages said that whenever an audacious woman demands relations verbally, or a man seduces a woman for the sake of marriage, he had the intent of having relations with his wife Rachel, instead engaged in relations with his wife Leah, or a woman does not wait 3 months after the death of her husband and gives birth to a son whose identity is questionable if it was from the first or second husband, which obviously with DNA, that question is, at least from a scientific perspective, changed. All of the children born in these situations will be rebellious and sinful, who will be purified by the sufferings of exile. So we want to make sure that a person needs to make sure the intimacy is done in a good environment and in a good way. Place. It is forbidden for a man to engage in relations with his wife in the marketplaces, streets, gardens, orchards. Instead, a couple should be physically intimate only in a home, so that they will not appear as licentious relations and will not habituate themselves to licentious relations. If a man and woman, even though they're allowed to each other, are going to be intimate with each other in somewhat of a public space, then they're already they're accustoming themselves to inappropriate behavior. And so it could end up going from what's allowed to what's not allowed. It could end up being from his wife to being with somebody else, because he's approaching something which is supposed to be so holy, and he's engaging in it in an inappropriate way. When a man engages in relations with his wife in such places, he should be given stripes of rebellion. Similarly, when a man consecrates a woman via sexual relations, that's one of the ways that the Torah says a man can marry a woman, but this is something that the rabbis forbid. Consecrates her in the marketplace. If a guy just walks over to a lady in the marketplace and gives her a golden ring and says, Harayat Mukadeshesli, and you guys are the witnesses, or consecrates her without there being an engagement beforehand, you just a random woman, he just walks up to her and says, will you marry me? Or Harayat Mukadeshesli. In all these scenarios, he would be given stripes of rebellion, obviously through a legal system, but the idea is that this is all inappropriate. Here's an interesting one. A visitor is forbidden to engage in relations until he returns home. I'll say just so that's so the commentaries say today that if you have your own space and you have your own spreads, or I would say even a towel, so that the host would not be aware of the fact that you engaged in intimacy, then that's allowed. I'll say just forbade a man from dwelling in his father-in-law's home, means obviously on a long-term basis, but this is brazen conduct, nor should he enter a bathhouse with him. Person should not enter a bathhouse with his father, his sister's husband, nor with his student, obviously when they're all completely undressed. If he needs his student to assist him, then that's allowed. There are places where people followed the custom that two brothers would not enter a bathhouse at the same time, so this would relate to men going to mikveh. And now we move on to, again, not acting inappropriately and not arousing inappropriate thoughts. And I'll try to do this as fast as I could. Jewish women should not walk in the marketplace with uncovered hair. Obviously means a woman that is married. This applies both to unmarried but was married, meaning a woman that was already married. Some give leniency for this, by the way. And married woman. Similarly, a woman should not walk in the street with her son following her. This is a decree enacted so that her son not be abducted and she follow after him to bring him back, and she be molested by wicked people who took hold of him as a caprice, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. So this, the Torah very much cares about the well-being and security of women. A woman shouldn't make herself vulnerable where she could end up running after her child and as a result of that fall into a trap and be abused. It is forbidden to release sperm wastefully. Therefore, a person should not enter his wife and ejaculate outside of her. A man should not marry a minor who is not fit to give birth. Those who, however, release sperm with their hands, beyond the fact that they commit a great transgression, a person who does this will abide under a ban of ostracism. Concerning them, it is said, your hands are filled with blood. It is as if they killed a person. So seed is looked at as the potential of life. And for a person to release seed intentionally outside of the context of intimacy or relationship is a sin, which is, I guess, why a man should not. This isn't why. It's definitely an additional benefit of men looking to get married. I know it's not always easy, but without that, it's pretty hard to prevent themselves from sitting in this way. Okay, if it is forbidden for a person to intentionally cause himself to have an erection or to bring himself to sexual thoughts, if the sexual thought comes to his mind, he should divert his heart from profligate and destructive matters to the words of Torah. So what do you do if you're having inappropriate thoughts? You can't stop thinking, but instead think of words of Torah, which are a beloved hind, arousing favor. For this reason, it is forbidden for a person to sleep on his back with his face upwards. This can cause him to have an erection. Instead, he should sleep on his side. The Shulchan Aruch also says not sleeping on one's stomach, because that could also cause an erection. We want that whole experience to be limited to the context of the holiness of intimacy between husband and wife. Here's an interesting one. Should not look at animals, beasts, and fowls at the times the males and females are coupling. One shouldn't watch animals mate. It is, however, permitted for a breeder of livestock to insert a male animal's organ in a female. Since he is working in his profession, he will not be motivated to sexual thoughts. Similarly, it is forbidden for a man to look at a woman while they do laundry, so they would lift their hands up and cause them to be more exposed. It is even forbidden to look at the colored garments of a woman. One knows lest one be motivated to sexual thoughts. So obviously this means getting carried away by the beauty of a woman, which could lead a person to have inappropriate thoughts. When a person encounters a woman in the street, it is forbidden for him to walk behind her. So if it's a narrow sidewalk, wherever it is, and you find yourself right behind the woman, and as a result of that, you may be looking at her inappropriately, you've got to move. Instead, he should hurry and position himself so that she is at his side or behind him. Whoever walks behind a woman in the marketplace is one of the frivolous and of the common people. It is forbidden to pass the entrance of a harlot without distancing himself 4 cubits. These are all measures that Rabbi said. If you don't want to end up in a place that's bad, then don't even go near it. Do not come close to the entrance of a home, says Proverbs. It is forbidden for an unmarried man to extend his hands to his testicles, lest he be stimulated to sexual thoughts. Indeed, he should not extend his hand below his navel, lest he be stimulated to such thoughts. If he urinates, he should rather not hold the shaft of his organ while urinating, or maybe he should rather use a tissue or avoid unnecessary contact. If he is married, this is permitted. Whether he is married or not, he should not extend his hand to his organ at all, except when he needs to urinate. Number 24. I know there's a lot being said, but we are quite short on time. The pious and the wise. One of the pious men of the early eras and the wise men of stature prided himself in that he never looked at his male organ. Another said with pride that he never contemplated his wife's physical form. Again, nowadays, very often people don't think enough about their wives. So it obviously means people of high stature that they wanted their relationship to be entirely holy and spiritual, and not to have any of a lust dimension to it. But their hearts will be diverted from prolific matters to the words of truth, which take hold of the hearts of the holy. Among our sages' commands is that a person should marry up his sons and daughters. So one final section, getting married young. I guess this I'll just do outside, and you're welcome to do it by yourself. Person should marry up their children young. This obviously prevents them from having inappropriate thoughts because they're able to direct it in a kosher context of marriage. And then a couple of halachos about the importance of marriage and compatibility. Once a couple is divorced, they've got to make sure not to have any dealings together. This is something that's forbidden because they've already known each other. We don't want them to now sin. Short-term marriages are not allowed unless they're made up in advance. Having wives in different countries could cause complications because brothers and sisters can end up marrying each other without knowing that they're their sibling, which very much relates to the context of sperm donors nowadays. It could be quite a halachic challenge. And finally, discouraged and recommended marriages, all very interesting and relevant halachas. I encourage you to finish off the last few halachas when you have a few moments. Thank you so much for joining. If I may